As was mentioned, the question of misunderstanding a country is not merely a question of psychology. It can have catastrophic consequences. When I lived in Russia, I had a friend who was a very high-level Soviet diplomat. He used to previously negotiate with the United States. He said, some people think that diplomacy is all about tricks or hiding your intentions. He said it's all nonsense. You cannot stop a great power acting on the basis of its own interests. The danger is that a great power may act on the basis of wrong information, a misunderstanding of the situation. And the only role, he said, of diplomacy is to make sure that the other side never acts on the basis of a misunderstanding or misinformation. Therefore, a very great danger which exists in the world at the present time is that there is very serious misunderstanding in the United States of China. And this doesn't lead, not just by Trump, but by wide circles. For example, Larry Summers, who was a Democratic Party Treasury Secretary, said that the Chinese economy was going to slow down to 3.9% a year. That is, he believed the Chinese economy was going to be very weak. China's economy is growing by more than 6% a year. He totally misunderstands the situation of China. Trump put out a famous tweet saying, "Trade wars are good and easy to win." I don't think he necessarily believes it now. He's found out that he misjudged the situation very seriously. But then that poses a question. How can you get a correct understanding of a country over to other countries? The mass character of a country is determined by its fundamental historical character. One of the most important things that Xi Jinping stresses is that every country is unique. Every country is equal, but every country is different, and every country is unique. Therefore, if you are trying to understand a country, what is important is to try to understand what is specific about that country. It's true, therefore, if you look at the big advantage in the situation in China, is actually there's very little problem now for foreigners who want to communicate with China. The development of the internet, I write on Weibo. One of my proudest things, started with 4 followers and got to 1 million followers, which means I must have some communication with the people in China. I must understand something about the situation. With modern translation equipment, there is no problem. I read many articles a day which are written in Chinese, and I discuss with people in Chinese. For foreigners to correctly understand China, it's not secret, it's not hidden. It's in probably some of the most famous words ever said in China, which is in 1949, the words which have come to symbolize the new China, which is, "The Chinese people have stood up." These words, for me at least, are the essence of understanding China. Why were these words chosen? Mao Zedong, when he announced the new China, didn't say, "Now GDP will grow very quickly." He didn't say, "Now we're going to take revenge on the rest of the world for the many millions of people who were killed in China." He didn't say, "Now we will begin to build a great power in the world." He chose, the words were, "The Chinese people have stood up." Why this? It is because between 1840, which is the real beginning of the period of trouble in China, I'm afraid very created by my country, unfortunately, in the first place. Right. For 100 years, about 100 million people died in China. What did the Chinese people have stood up, therefore, mean? It didn't mean China is now taller than every other country. That is, it was not a declaration, China is better than any other country. It's not like Trump. The US is number 1, which means you are number 2, or maybe number 3, or maybe number 50. You are less good than me, less good than my country. China didn't say that. China doesn't go around saying China is number 1, everybody else is less. It didn't say it's taller than anybody else. But it did say China is not going to be less equal than anybody else. something which everybody can understand. That is my view. I don't believe that my country is less good than the United States. I think that my country is different to the United States and my country is different to China. But it's not less good than any other country in the world. That is my fundamental understanding of what is the situation about China, and I think that Xi Jinping's written very profound things. This understanding that countries are equal and different, which is the core of the Chinese foreign policy written by Xi Jinping, is extremely profound. I want to take another example, however, of a contemporary event which shows what is also, in my judgment, the opposite of what is China. I want to take the events in Hong Kong. How did Britain, a small island, well, a medium-sized island, rule the biggest empire in the history of the world? This was not possible purely by military force. It ruled by divide and rule. It was expert in setting one part of society against another part. So in India, it set Hindu and Muslim against each other. In Ireland, it set Protestant and Catholic against each other. In relation to China, what did it do in Hong Kong? It taught the people of Hong Kong, and it ruled for 150 years, two things. It said, look up to the British. The British are wonderful. Look up to them and look down on the people in mainland China. That's what it taught them for 150 years. And you can see this. Let's take one of the main supporters of the rioters, Joshua Wong. Joshua Wong recently put out a tweet saying, in the words of our Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. What is this? No person in Hong Kong was ever allowed to vote for the Prime Minister of Britain. He was never our Prime Minister. This is a person who looks up to the British, who looked down on his country, or not his country, his region, and never gave him any political rights. For 150 years, the British ruled Hong Kong, and they never allowed the election of the head of the government, the Governor-General, in any form at all, to be elected. What I call slave mentality is the mentality where you look up to somebody and you look down on somebody else. And this is the exact opposite of what China says. The Chinese people have stood up is all the Chinese people have stood up. All the Chinese people are equal to, not better than, but equal to anybody else in the world. That, in my opinion, is the understanding which China needs to get across to the United States. That China is not threatening the United States. China did not launch the trade war against the United States. China, at least all, wants a war with the United States. But China will not be accepted to be treated as less good or less equal than the United States. And the reasons for that are deep in Chinese history. If that understanding can be got over to the people of the United States and to the leaders of the United States, in my opinion, then the dangers of very dangerous miscalculations will be avoided.
刚才您说到，苏联实际上是自杀的。现在问题是，我们中国有没有这种自杀的倾向或者可能性？因为我们的网络上也有一些崇洋媚外的，像黄之锋这样的声音。
I think this is the biggest danger to China. Yes, this is the thing that most worries me. China cannot be murdered, so it has to be persuaded to commit suicide. By which I mean the enemies of China are not powerful enough to attack China directly. The Chinese people are very lucky about this. If you were Iraq or Libya or a Latin American country, you might be invaded. And don't forget, it's one of the greatest achievements of China that this is no longer possible. There is no external force that can defeat China. Only if China makes big mistakes internally can China be defeated. That is my fundamental view of the situation.